Good morning, first period. Good afternoon, fifth period. Today we're going to be starting a new project. Today, what I want to go over is our correlation project. And it says here for our correlation project, post hoc, ergo proper hoc, which of course is Latin for do your math homework, but it's also Latin for from such, thus such. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at different correlations and seeing how they relate to each other and seeing if we can see if one thing is informing another. Because it's a common phrase to say that correlation does not imply causation, meaning that if two things happen at the same time, it does not mean that one thing is causing the other thing to happen. You know, for example, one of the things we talk about a lot in correlation is height and shoe size. If you have big feet, it does not cause you to be tall. And if you are tall, it does not cause you to have big feet. They both happen independently, possibly from a similar cause further down the line. However, let's go ahead and scroll down a bit. Our goal is to gather and analyze observable quantitative data, and you can see that I bolded and underlined it. Now I'm highlighting it for you again, to analyze the strength of the correlation. So when we're talking about quantitative data, we have to be looking at things that are measurable. Okay, if they're not measurable, then it doesn't work. We don't want to be using any sort of categorical data. We don't want to, we're not interested in ice cream versus cake versus pie. We're interested in things that we can actually measure with numbers. So we're going to do this in a couple of different stages, 5 stages actually. The first stage, which I'm going to go over in this video today while you have the substitute, is we are going to first form a hypothesis of 2 variables that may have a correlation. We're going to come up with a couple things that we think may happen at the same time. Once you guys have come up with your own individual correlation or your own individual hypothesis about a correlation, then we're going to gather data on those 2 variables, collecting at least 10 data points from reliable, I'm just going to take my time one more time, reliable sources, creating a box and whisker plot for each variable, easy enough. 3, we're going to create a scatter plot that compares these variables using an online tool to calculate the correlation coefficient. Pretty neat. 4, we're going to create a predictive line of best fit. This is also known as the regression line, and analyze the line using the residual plot. And finally, we're going to write a reflection on your data, write a report that incorporates your data using Google Sheets to create a scatter plot, and analyze your original hypothesis from stage 1. So you guys are going to put on your statistician hat, and you guys are going to get all this stuff done today. But keep in mind, number 1 is what we're going to be working on since I'm out today. Here is a rough game plan of what we're going to look like. This is today. Tomorrow we'll kind of wrap up stage 1. Maybe we can move to stage 2, I'm not sure. But by Thursday I want stage 1 and stage 2 to be done. Friday we don't meet because the juniors are taking their Smarter Balance exam. And then there's next week at a glance as well. Alright, let's go to stage 1. We are going to form a hypothesis of 2 variables that may have a correlation. Sales and shaved heads. We found this correlation in the data. Everyone take a razor. Ha 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 ha. Right? So sometimes we can see things that do have a correlation, but they're not exactly causing one another. But what we want to do is we want to try to find those things that we think may have a correlation. So let's go ahead and read through this. Data analysis is used to answer real-world questions. For this project, you will be collecting and analyzing data to see if 2 events have a correlation. And a correlation is a relationship that shows 2 events occur relative to each other positively, negatively, or not at all. Right? This would be our old our old correlation coefficient where we have -1, we have 0, and then we have 1, and then we have the strong zones which are close to the 1s, and then we would have the weak zones which is close to the 0. For example, people, The height of someone has a positive correlation to their shoe size. Taller people tend to have larger feet, shorter people tend to have smaller feet. Perhaps there's a correlation between things like school attendance and GPA, or education level and salary. These might be hints of things we can do. So what are other things that you think have a positive correlation? What are things that when you have the more of one, you have the more of the other? Okay, like height and shoe size. The higher the height, the higher the shoe size, the higher attendance you have, the higher your GPA, the higher education level you have, the higher salary you earn. So what I want you guys to do right now, and you can go ahead and press pause, whoever is substituting today. What I want you guys to do now is I want you to fill in 3 relationships, 3 things that you think may have a positive correlation. All right, go ahead and do that. Okay, so we've kind of talked about it. What I want you guys to do now is volunteer some of your positive correlations. So go ahead, call on some students, raise your hands, guys. What are some things that you think are positive correlations? And go ahead and pause the video now. Cool. So that's positive, but some of you may have said things that were actually negative correlations that were related to each other. And so let's talk about what a negative correlation means. A negative correlation are things such as driving speed and commute time, where when one is higher, right, the faster we drive, the less time it takes to get to work or to get to school or to get to the store or get to wherever you're going. So what are some things that have a negative correlation? The more that you do of one thing, the less you have of another. All right? So I'm going to go ahead, pause the video, come up with 3 things. Cool. So now, class, I want you guys to share the things that you have that have a negative correlation. What are the things that you came up with? And go ahead and discuss them. All right, go ahead and pause. Neato. All right. So, I've done my own example for you guys. Some things are difficult to find if there is a correlation. For example, there's an old phrase that money can't buy happiness. If we were to investigate the correlation between money and happiness, we would face some challenges. Right? What challenges might we face in trying to gather data on these 2 things? Go ahead and answer those questions in class. I'm hoping what you guys said is that while money is easy enough to calculate, like you can look into your wallet, you can look into your bank account, we could look at gross domestic product, we could look at all sorts of data that tracks how much money people have. Happiness is a little bit tougher to quantify, right? We're looking for things that we can measure with numbers. And it's like, how happy are you? I'm a 7? I'm a 2.39? Like, it's impossible to kind of figure out what we mean when we say happiness. It's too relative to the individual person on how they define happiness. So that's a challenge when we talk about these sorts of things. Now, I'm gonna do a challenging one just to kind of show you one of the things that I'm thinking about. And of course, I always think about the Notorious B.I.G. usually in most of my life. Because he had that famous song, Mo Money, Mo Problems. And in this, he hypothesized that there is a positive correlation between money and problems, right? As one goes up, as money goes up, problems go up. All right? Mo money, mo problems. So I'm going to investigate whether or not this is true. But before I do that, I have to create a plan of how I'm going to measure money and problems. So here's what I did. For money, I decided to look at the big picture. So what I did is I wanted to look at the wealthiest and poorest regions in the United States and measure their GDP. This is their gross domestic product. This is how much money is in their economy. And so then to look at problems, what I decided to do is I decided I'd look at crime rates. Okay? So I'm going to compare GDP to crime rate. So my hypothesis is I'm going to agree with Biggie Smalls and that the wealthier regions will have a higher crime rate. This is just my hypothesis. I'm going to agree that the more money we have, the more problems we have. So what I want you to do is the same thing, where I went with money and problems. You know, I want you to pick two things that may be related as well. You can look back at the positive or the negative correlations that we've already had, but what two things may be related that you're going to investigate? This data should be available online, or it must be possible to create. Okay, so this data has to be obtainable. So I want you to think about that. And when I say online, it has to be something you can research. And when I say it's something you can create, it means something you can do a survey for. Now again, we're looking at quantifiable data. Avoid categorical things. You know, I'm not, don't say, I think people who like superhero movies will also enjoy, superhero comic books. That's categorical in nature. It's not quantifiable. I mean, how do you measure enjoyment? I enjoy it a 7. I enjoy it 3 million. I enjoy it 2. Those don't make any sense. So what I want you to do is I want you to actually look at things that you can quantify. Maybe it's something physical, how far people can run in a minute, how many jumping jacks they can do in a minute, and compare it to something else that is also quantifiable. Like things like GPA, yada yada yada. If those are things that you actually want to look at. However, another good thing you could do would be to look at something data driven in the world. You could look at income levels and education levels. You can look at proximity to the coast and income levels. I don't know. It's countless. There's so many different ways that you can look at it. So using some of the ideas that we've already brainstormed, this is what I want you to do. I want to see how something relates to something. And when we do this, we're going to end up with two things. We're going to end up with an X variable, and we're going to end up with a Y variable. So in my example, I've got money and problems. I'm going to just do B because typing with a mouse is harder than I wanted it to be. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to, excuse me, you're going to say whether or not you think it's positive, negative, or neither. In my case, I think it's a positive correlation. How are you going to collect data for money? I'm going to go look at the GDP of different regions, and then I'm going to look at crime rates here. So I want you to actually think about how you're going to do this. All right? So here's my example. For my example, I will see how money relates to problems. My hypothesis is that it's a positive relationship. My methodology to collect data for money will be to collect GDP data of different U.S. regions. My methodology to collect data for Y problems will be to collect crime rate statistics of those same U.S. regions. All right? So that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do. Now, no lie, this is the hardest step. Trying to figure out the two things that you're going to compare is going to be a little bit difficult. Hopefully, what you have done is we have looked, when we were doing this step here, you guys were paying attention and you were listening and you were trying to find good things that you could find data on. If you skipped over that or you didn't do that in earnest, go back to this step and try to brainstorm some things that you can compare. Even if you came up with something here and something here, maybe these two things are better off to be compared than some of the other ones. So that's what we're going to be doing today. By the end of today, I want you guys to be close to writing this sort of statement. All right, if you can write this sort of statement, that's great. Tomorrow when I come back, I'll answer any questions. I'll help critique some of these statements. I'll help you tinker with it so that we have the most perfect statements so that we can move forward. All right, that's our video. Good luck, guys.